examples of technology, like something like, okay, we're not doing a video call here, but we could. When I was younger, that was like always a science fiction staple film, video call. People wanted it, people figured it out.
We watched an episode of Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror the other night. We actually found ourselves saying, Jesus, is this the present or the future? Technologies are so on the verge all the time just now that, yeah. And that's the thing which is really interesting, because it's a very good example. We've got an ideology which says in technology, everything is possible. We still believe in, this is the 20 years, it's the 2015 is the year that Marty McFly goes into the future in Back to the Future 2. And we still believe in hoverboards effectively. We still believe everything is possible in technology because we have this national ideology, this global ideology of unlimited progress through technology. But what was done is the exact reverse in politics and in social affairs. The neoliberal right fought for the 80s and the 90s in particular to persuade us that no real change is possible in politics and in society. Everything is possible in technology, nothing's possible in society. And the only way you change that is to persuade people that actually it is possible to change things in society. And the examples you give are perfect, because the key is it does start with the idea. The belief comes second. It's the idea that tends to come first. And so it's the first time that you say to somebody, we could have a national health service. And then you close your eyes and you say, a national health service, carefree at the point of need for everybody, funded collectively from taxation. I can imagine that thing. And once you've imagined it, you stop and you think, something, I'd really like that thing. And that's when you start to believe that this is the way to go forward. You can't believe in something that you can't imagine. That's the difficulty. And what we've been bad at, again, I think, in the left over the last 30 or 40 years, is we've not given people things to imagine. We need to give them a vision of what it would be like, a better world, not just a complaint about the one that we had, but a different vision. And so, that's exactly what we're trying to do. I'm cautiously optimistic. The volume of interest that we've had from partner organisations right across the UK in this question of developing an agenda for 2016 to 2020 in the Scottish Parliament is amazing. People really, really want to do this. And I'm actually, like I say, cautiously hopeful that there's some really cracking thinking that's coming through here. And bluntly, I'm hoping that if we can get that thinking on the table, it's the one to beat. Because despite the fact there are a couple of, other think tanks, right-wing think tanks in Scotland, it's not like we have an awful lot of people setting an intellectual agenda for what's to come next. So I'm really hopeful that if we can produce good ideas, they will gain a lot of support and it will gain political traction, and that we can see a genuinely radical government approaching in Scotland.
Oh, so, but to go back a bit to what you said then, because you were saying that political parties, are not necessarily the creators of ideas, or in fact they're not. So what do you think about the surge, and this mass, it was just a really shocking thing, just this mass enrollment or mass signing up to political parties, not including Labour, of course.
Yeah, but I mean, the last thing that I would give the impression is that when I say that political parties don't produce ideas, that I'm therefore being critical of political parties. Likewise, academics and think tanks don't do the drudge work of taking ideas to the doors and trying to persuade people that a set of ideas is the way to go forward, and nor do they go through the exhausting processes of selecting candidates and preparing campaigns and then getting into Parliament and best they can fighting the good fight. So it's not either or. We need political parties. We need big ideas. We need stone-throwing troublemakers outside of the whole process who do complain and point out the failures and all these sorts of things. And what happened, I think, after the referendum was it was kind of like a scream of desire for change. We didn't get that yes vote, but we had to do something. And I've got to say, I'm a big fan of doing something. I've said for years, if you're sitting in front of a blank sheet of paper, write a word. Just write something. Or if you're sitting and you don't know what to do something. And once you do the first thing, the next thing becomes easier. And so what I think happened was that a lot of people, and I'm not giving up and I need to do something. Something that I can do today is get involved, get structurally involved. And I know, because I know so many people who joined the SNP, and believe me, some of them greatly surprised me. But I know some of them joined almost as a protest join. So some of them, it wasn't particularly they wanted to join a political party, but they wanted to register that they were not dead, they were not finished after that vote. And I know other people who practically said, well, I want a political party, and it looks to me my best bet is to try and get in and influence the SNP or the Greens. And I know other people who kind of had been meaning to or wanted to, or they were inspired or they met people. So there's a whole range of reasons which people would have used to join. But I think above all, it was the do something, just do something impact of coming through the referendum and not wanting to be demobbed, not wanting to be sent back to the shopping malls and the multiplexes where people had been before and wanting to stay active. So, I mean, anybody who's not surprised by the volume of what happened, particularly in the SNP, proportionately even more so in the Greens, if you're not surprised, then you've not been paying attention. But I wasn't that surprised. I knew, just from conversations that I had days after the referendum, I knew that there was this mass will to do something, and it was an obvious thing to do. So I think it's great for politics. I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens now. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for the SNP to keep those 70,000 new members, many of whom are not necessarily deeply committed to the SNP as a political party. And let's be honest, there's no political party in all of history which doesn't disappoint.
No,
they disappoint. It's they're the dividing line between idealism and reality, and they will disappoint. There's no question about that. And the question is, to what extent will that new membership shape the party into being one that is as undisappointing as possible, if I put it like that, and fight inside the party to make it the best party it can be? Or will people start to drift away? If they drift away, will they drift into another political party? Will they do other things? It is the most fascinating time that I can ever remember.
Especially with the general election coming up, and who's going to be in any proposed coalition, who's not going to go in with who, and all of the leaders and all of the parties at the moment. Wings have been doing a thing about this in continuation, because it's quite funny. Everyone seems to be saying, if you vote for this person, you get someone else. If you vote Labour, you get Tory. If you vote SNP, you get Lib Dem. I don't know what's going on anymore.
The Daily Mash joke in that one was, if you haven't seen it, go and hunt the Daily Mash site out with a Scottish voter who's trying to work out what his vote actually means. And, if he votes SNP, he's getting Tory. If he votes Labour, he's getting UKIP. And it works around this crazy arithmetic, and he comes back to concluding it doesn't really make any difference. Now, this time it does make some difference, because what happens with the vote is actually quite significant in the UK this time round. Although I have always had a nagging doubt about what's going to happen afterwards. So we are running this Red Lines campaign, and what it's all about is saying, for any parties negotiating a coalition who are trying to drag the big Westminster parties to the left in a progressive direction, we're proposing 5 red line issues that we're suggesting should be non-negotiable if they want that support. But I've got to admit that I've been worried from the beginning, and still am, that we mustn't underestimate the power of the British state, of the British establishment. And I wonder whether we're given an adequate focus on what could be a sort of strange grand coalition of the British state after this, which is to say, either the Tories or the Labour Party governing in minority, but doing so on the basis of a small number of shared things which the British state feels to be essential to its existence, such as Trident. And I have this awful feeling that we will see an informal alliance of new Labour types and the Tories, who will find ways, short of any form of coalition, to work together to make sure that Britain doesn't lose Trident before they'll allow any negotiations which would put that at risk. So what I think is interesting is not just the election or how people respond or behave or what they vote. What I think is really interesting is how the British state responds. And I have this feeling that what's going to come out of this election is a cry of anger from the people of Britain, right across Britain, one way or the other, left and right, or none of the above. A cry of anger about a political system that they can feel in their bones is broken. And that cry of anger is probably going to create this strange, fragmented, dispersed parliament. What I think is going to be really interesting or really telling is how the British state responds. And I have this terrible feeling that the British state is going to do what it always does with any rebellion from any of its colonies. And it was a really interesting comment that someone said to me that England is the last colony of the British Empire. Which was a really nice way to describe it. And that they start to see their own voters as sort of unrowdy colonial troublemakers, and that their role is to make sure that this cry of anger is ignored, and that the British state continues to function like it always functioned, with its leaky tax rules and its arms sales and its ridiculous defence budget and so on, and foreign policy stance and so on and so on. So the question might not be what's the election outcome. I think the question might be, how do the powers that are invested in the British state, how do they respond to that election result? And I rather suspect that we may be disappointed. And this could be yet one more failure of Britain to recognise that it's time to change.
It's only been 400 years or something.
Britain has failed to change for a lot longer than 400 years. That line about England being the last colony of the British Empire, it was from somebody that I was talking to in a visit to London recently, and what they were saying was, no, you've got to see that Britain is still, this is not a 200-year-old, 300-year-old power structure in Britain. While it's changed, we're still dealing with lords. We have a House of Lords. And yeah, the hereditary stuff was greatly weakened, but if you look at the profile of them, we've still got archbishops and making laws. We've still got the landed gentry taking up positions of power purely through accidents of birth. And God knows we know what's going on with the private schooling sector in England. You could argue that 1066 was the last time that you really saw major shifts in the British class control of the nation. Although, obviously, that period between about 1945 and 1955 was slightly different. But Britain is notoriously bad at reforming itself, and even more notoriously clever at describing its failure to reform as clever. So if I have to hear one more time, the genius of the British Constitution is that it isn't written down. Well, would it not be more genius if you wrote it down then? if it works so well, let's get that down in paper right now and show the world what a cracking system we've got. And the answer is no, they don't put it down in paper, because if you wrote it down, you'd look at it and you'd say, what? We're running a country like how?
Yeah.
So
you're saying the failure to change, or the ability to deceive itself there's an ability to deceive itself that it has changed in some meaningful way as well. You make me think of Thatcher when she went to, I think it must have been 1989, and there was the 200-year celebration of the French Revolution, and Thatcher had to go, and I think it would have been Mitterrand or Chirac, Mitterrand probably at that time, and she angered him thoroughly by saying, well, in Britain we did the same thing 100 years before and nobody had to die. I think meaning some of the Reform Acts, but they didn't do the same thing at all. The Reform Acts were doing that standard thing of doing just enough to stave off the unwashed, but not giving them any more.
One of the things which, and again, there was so much during the process of the referendum that changed my thinking. It was a massive educational experience for me. And one of the things which I realised more and more during the campaign was, what is Britain? If you look at Britain, what is it? And one of the things which is strange is, if you look at half of what Britain is, it's a modern nation state. But if you look at the other half of what Britain is, it really looks more like a collapsing empire. So a nation state of Britain's size does not own the number of aircraft carriers that we own. The number of aircraft carriers that we own imply that we are an imperial power, and we're not. We've got a foreign policy and defence stance that looks like something other than a nation state, and we're in denial. I mean, Britain is not a successful economy. Britain is not a major player in the world stage like we think we are. So yes, we cling on to our nuclear weapons and our permanent membership of the Security Council of the United Nations, but it's not real power if the only way that you get anything done is to agree with America. And that's over and over what happens, that we kid ourselves on that we are powerful and influential, but we are powerful and influential in as much as we agree with other people who are more powerful and influential than us. And it's telling, and I mean, Britain is